So welcome to my paper for the British Association for Irish Studies virtual conference. Many thanks to the Bays for putting on this great event. I'll be presenting my paper titled The Poppy, Paraflags and the NHS, Iterability and Commemoration in Post-Conflict Northern Ireland. The COVID-19 pandemic is undoubtedly having a profound impact on politics in Northern Ireland as elsewhere. These political effects are multiple and have the potential to move things in various different directions. Those wishing to see the response to the pandemic as a sign of more mature political leadership can point to the joint press conferences and television appearances, as seen in this image, of the First and Deputy First Ministers, Arlene Foster and Michelle O'Neill, and the ability of these two figures to set aside the differences that had left Northern Ireland without functioning devolved government for 3 years up to January 2020. Such actions can be seen as transcending the usual divides, not so much in my view between the so-called two communities in Northern Ireland, that is, on one hand, political nationalists and Republicans, largely associated with the Catholic tradition, who wish to see Northern Ireland become part of a united Ireland, and political unionists and loyalists, largely associated with a Protestant tradition, who want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, but rather between the self-appointed political representatives of those two communities, who at executive level are prone to working within enclosed silos, rather than developing joined-up cabinet-style government. Those suspecting a business-as-usual tribalism, however, can point to bickering over the use of the British Army to support medics, or the possible location of an emergency field hospital at the site of the former Mays prison for paramilitaries. The pandemic is also disrupting the wider political rhythms of life in Northern Ireland. The summer of 2020 may be free of the usual pattern of marches and bonfires, particularly after the Orange Order announced on the 6th of April that all 12th of July parades will be cancelled this year. Discussions are said to be ongoing with loyalist communities about the holding of bonfires on the eve of the 12th, and similar discussions must also be taking place with regards to other loyalist and Republican bonfires due to take place in August. While large-scale events that require weeks or months of planning are unlikely to go ahead, it will be fascinating to see if some of the other traditions of the summer season, such as the hanging of flags and bunting on lampposts and from houses, will still take place. And if they do, what exactly will these flags symbolise? Will the newfound enthusiasm indicated on this slide for images of the NHS in both Republican and Loyalist areas as a recognition of gratitude for frontline health workers risking their lives during the pandemic continue into the summer marching and bonfire season? So we see here on the left the famous International Wall in West Belfast with the NHS logo added. At the bottom, we see the famous Free Dairy Corner with this similar NHS logo. And we salute our key workers slogan. Both of these staunchly Republican areas, where the murals usually refer to issues of the struggle for Irish freedom or related campaigns. And then on the right, we see the NHS logo in a loyalist estate in East Belfast, marked out as belonging to that community by the presence of the Union flag and the image of British Army veteran Captain Tom Moore. So this will be particularly interesting to observe, in my view, as the last few years have seen a new addition to the retina of cultural and political display in Northern Ireland. That is the use of the emblem of the Parachute Regiment of the British Army, as seen on this slide, either as a hated symbol to be set alight by those opposed to British jurisdiction over Northern Ireland, or an image of defiance used to demonstrate loyalty to the British state and crown. The Parachute Regiment have long held a contentious position in Northern Ireland due to their central role in two massacres in the early years of the Troubles, those in Ballymurphy in August 1971, and the Bloody Sunday killings of January 1972. Indeed, note the image on the left here, where the flag is emblazoned with the Parachute Regiment emblem, the year 1972, and the Loyalist slogan, "No Surrender," a clear and provocative reference to Bloody Sunday. However, the most recent utilisation of this emblem comes in the context of the March 2019 decision of the Northern Ireland Public Prosecution Service that criminal proceedings could begin against the paratrooper known as Soldier F for the murder of 2 of the 14 civilians killed on Bloody Sunday. Soldier F, as seen in this slide, has also been incorporated into these displays, whether through messages of support, such as the banner shown on the top left, one of many that were flown last year, or a symbol of hatred, as seen in the bonfire lit in Derry in August 2019 at the bottom of this slide, which was covered not only with the usual flags and emblems symbolising the Unionist Loyalist community, but with many para flags and references to Soldier F. So the question this paper will ask is, how can we understand this zigzagging between the deeply divisive use of the Parachute Regiment flag and the shared use of the NHS logo in a matter of less than 12 months? Is this transformation a sign that the shared response to coronavirus is bringing the once divided communities together? So I'm afraid my argument in this paper will dispute that idea, but I will be making what I view as a positive argument about commemoration in Northern Ireland. This is because I will be equally sceptical about readings of the use of divisive emblems, such as the para flag, which view them as symbols of fixed communal difference. Instead, by reading commemoration through the philosopher Jacques Derrida's notion of iterability, I will present a view of commemoration as something which both repeats previous forms of commemoration through citation, while simultaneously producing new forms of remembrance in the present, and an orientation which I believe can provide for positive engagement with these practices of commemoration, as I will discuss later in the presentation. But it's now time to introduce the Derridian notion of iterability. Derrida has argued that the possibility of writing depends upon it being and remaining readable in the absence of the writer and intended receiver. To remain readable even when the original intentions are no longer clear or the intended audiences are no longer present, writing must be repeatable or capable of being reinscribed into a new communicable system. However, for Derrida, such citation does not simply repeat an earlier form of writing or an earlier piece of text. Rather, each repetition creates a new singularity in the moment of repetition. Derrida calls this logic that ties repetition to alterity iterability. Iterability refers to the possibility of written text being repeated or cited, and not the necessity of this repetition or citation. Even a note to self requires this possibility to function. A shopping list, to give the example Derrida discusses, operates on the possibility of an absence of memory, on the alterity between the self walking the aisles of a supermarket and the self writing that list at home before heading to the shops. This possible absence is therefore inscribed into the very mark of writing, an absence within the presence of writing. Iterability, by implying both identity and difference, this marks a division within writing, a splitting that is simultaneously constitutive of writing. While experience is an experience of a singularity, the mark that attempts to represent or communicate experience is never singular. It is always repeatable and alterable through iterability. Furthermore, for Derrida, this iterability is not just something that can be done to previously existing writing, but rather structures the mark of writing itself, no matter what particular type of writing is involved. So to quote Derrida, a writing that is not structurally readable or iterable beyond the death of the addressee would not be writing. And it's important for my purposes to recognize that this logic of iterability applies not simply to written communication for Derrida, but to other forms of conveying meaning as well, indeed to anything that requires interpretation. So this means that practices of commemoration operate through the same logics of iterability as any other text. Commemorative practices are therefore iterable in the sense that they can remain readable in the absence of the persons who called for their institution in the first place. And the symbolism and wording in the rituals or imagery, which will usually themselves be citations of earlier practices, will continue to be interpretable and citable beyond the lifespan of those touched by the events commemorated. And crucially for Derrida, the logic of iterability is one of undecidability. It is this repetition that is at the same time unique. That is this undecidability between those two, between repetition and singularity. Identifying this undecidability allows, in my view, for two political responses to contemporary practices of commemoration in Northern Ireland. Firstly, it opens them to a deconstructive critique, which highlights how they operate in the present through selective acts of reappropriation and rearticulation to construct the historical grounds which they claim to refer to. Thus, rather than viewing these symbols as representative of fixed fault lines of division, we can see them as unstable and contingent acts which generate their own grounds of support through the act of commemoration, rather than locating themselves on the secure footing of communal identity. Secondly, once we recognize that processes of commemoration are not built on fixed understandings of historical realities, but rather work to construct and maintain these in the present, we are receptive to understanding how these practices can alter and change. Commemorative practices do, of course, often constitute and police the community boundaries in Northern Ireland, but this is not all they do, and they are not natural outgrowths of a persistent and unchanging communal divide. Viewing them through the logic of iterability therefore allows us to understand various aspects of commemoration in Northern Ireland. We can use it to understand how commemoration operates as a divisive practice, whereby new symbols, such as the paraflags and soldierette banners discussed above, are stitched into ongoing practices of ritual and display. It can also help us understand the contested legacy of symbols such as the poppy in Ireland, a symbol that has been cited, recited, and appropriated in numerous memorials and commemorative practices, alongside oft-repeated phrases such as "lest we forget" and "at the going down of the sun we shall remember them." These are used in services of remembrance for those killed while serving in the British Army, including those killed in the Troubles. In places where the British Army are seen as the killers of civilians, such as parts of Derry, poppy wreaths are therefore sometimes added to the bonfires burnt in Republican areas, like that shown earlier in the presentation. Loyalist paramilitaries, on the other hand, often mimic remembrance services when they commemorate their dead, as shown in the image on this slide in the top right from a UDA service in South Belfast, which used the rituals associated with war remembrance services and even appropriated a space built as a war memorial. Through such acts, these paramilitaries claimed the legitimacy associated with soldiers fighting in war. The poppy and associated symbols are also used in some cases to commemorate civilians killed in the Troubles, even in cases when families of victims would deny legitimacy of war to those responsible for the deaths. They would not view those as responsible for those deaths as engaged in legitimate military action. So the image in the middle on this slide shows the memorial recently constructed to commemorate those killed on Remembrance Day in Enniskillen, 1987, in the most notorious example of Republican opposition to services of remembrance in Ireland. The long and still ongoing campaign for this specific memorial to be installed at the site was in part motivated by anger that the cenotaph, the war memorial in Enniskillen, the site of the bombing, had been used to commemorate the attack in a move seen by some family members as a perverse conflation of civilians murdered by terrorist atrocity with soldiers killed in war. And finally, the image on the bottom left shows current Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar wearing a shamrock poppy in the Dáil in an attempt to normalise remembrance for the Irishmen who fought in the British Army in the First World War, a memory long obscured by the focus on the 1916 Easter Rising in Republican nationalist methodology. And do see the texts referenced in the bibliography for more on this. And finally, this orientation also enables an openness to the radical changes in symbolisation that we have witnessed in 2020, with the appearance of many murals to the NHS and key workers, as well, in my view, as providing the impetus to argue for the maintenance and acceleration of such change. So this logic of iterability thus provides a means of understanding how commemoration functions in divided societies such as Northern Ireland, a critique of the operation of symbols within logics of division, and a means of challenging and overcoming this through a politics which recognises the instability and contingency of commemorative practices. So in conclusion, I have argued that we should not be surprised by the appearance of NHS logos in Northern Ireland this year, but this is how a commemoration functions through a logic of iterability that enables new symbols to be incorporated into forms of ritual and display. The Derridian orientation to commemoration presented here loosens the bounds connecting commemoration to identity in some analyses, while this guards against overly optimistic pronouncements of shared symbols inaugurating a new, less divisive politics. It also ensures we don't read antagonistic forms of display as evidence of the existence of opposed and fixed communal differences. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be delighted to receive any comments or questions on Twitter or on the comments below. And as promised, here are the texts cited from Derrida and in relation to the poppy. And here are the websites cited for the images used in the slide. Thank you.